Hi, Michelle Glass here. Welcome back to another episode of our Chapter 12, Lecture 12. And our topic here is finally that action potential or the nerve impulse. So we've been using this word now for a while and we still don't really know what it means, but hopefully we'll have a better understanding at the end of our video. Let's spend a little bit of time just giving some basic descriptions before we go into the mechanism. Action potentials can be described as all or none. We use the same phrasing in skeletal muscle. In skeletal muscle, it either meant that the cell was contracted or it was at rest. Same kind of thing here. We're either getting our signal or we're not. There's no big and small action potentials. There is just an action potential. Action potentials will be propagated. We've used the word travel in the past. Propagated is better because you have the same set of steps repeated the whole length of our excitable membrane, which here would be our axonema. It's basically movement of ions. So we're going to see really the movement of sodium and potassium across that axonema. And it's initiated only after the membrane reaches a certain measure, which is called a threshold. I like to think about threshold as my magic number. Once we get there, we have our action potential. Now, getting to the threshold can take a really long time. Maybe you have a bunch of really small graded potentials or a really huge one, and you get there fast. That's where there's some variation, but once you're there, the action potential happens the same way every time. We've already mentioned that it's a series of depolarization becoming more positive, repolarization back to resting, but dipping below that, hyperpolarizing, making the cell even more negative than resting. So this is where we kind of left off, looking at resting membrane potential. We said that the sodium-potassium exchange pump has set up a high concentration of sodium in the ECF, low concentration of potassium in the inside of the cell. Negatively charged proteins are all hanging out right inside the membrane, super attracted to all that sodium on the outside, giving us a resting membrane potential of negative 70 millivolts. Then we see a graded potential, the release of acetylcholine neurotransmitter from a synaptic knob. ACH binds to those chemically gated sodium channels, giving us our first movement, our initial movement of sodium into the cell. This is our graded potential. So now we're depolarizing the cell. We're going from negative 70 and we're getting more and more positive until we reach the magic moment of threshold. So threshold for our neurons, based on our text, is negative 60 millivolts. So this is definitely a number we need to memorize. It is the graded potential that takes us from negative 70 to negative 60. Once you're at negative 60 millivolts, you are at threshold. You have your action potential. Okay, so this is like that magic number. What is so magical about threshold? It's the moment when the voltage-gated sodium channels open up or activate. So now not only do we have sodium coming in from those chemically gated sodium channels, but we now have a ton of sodium moving in through voltage-gated sodium channels. So our cell is going to get more and more and more positive, all the way to 30 millivolts. Now, this is as positive as our cell will get, and we'll see why in just a minute. I'm going to graph out for you the action potential. So if you want to put the graph in your notes, or you can find it already published in your textbook artwork, go ahead and sort of make this layout for yourself. We're starting then, remember, at negative 70 millivolts at resting membrane potential. We get a stimulus, which means a release of neurotransmitter at the axon hillock, which is going to give us our graded potential. So our graded potential is that initial opening of chemically gated sodium channels, allowing the influx of sodium. depolarizing our cell until we hit threshold. At threshold, we get our voltage-gated sodium channels opening, and we are depolarizing the cell to our peak of 30 millivolts. And again, this is as positive as the cell can get, because at 30, those voltage-gated voltage-gated sodium channels close. And I wanted that to be much more dramatic, sorry. And the voltage-gated potassium channels open. So no more positive charge coming in. Instead, you have positive charge going out. And so what's that going to do to the charge of your cell? If you're losing positive charge, the cell becomes more negative. So now we're getting into that repolarization. The potassium is leaving the cell, and the cell is dipping back down toward the negative 70 millivolts, back toward resting membrane potential. But those sneaky potassium channels, they stay open until negative 90 millivolts. And so our cell actually hyperpolarizes, meaning get more negative than resting, because it's not until the cell reaches negative 90 millivolts that those pesky voltage-gated potassium channels close. Okay, so we dip back down all the way below to a negative 90. Then we're going to see the activities of the sodium-potassium exchange pump, returning us back to normal. So notice we're going from a graded potential to a full depolarization, repolarization, and then hyperpolarization of our action potential. Here we see our sodium-potassium exchange pump re-establishing our resting membrane potential. So we're taking our cell back to negative 70 millivolts. And that's it for now.